So welcome to the latest Q modules feedback session. I've slightly renamed it from the modules proposal feedback session. It's still one and the same thing. It's just ended up being a bit of a clumsy title. So because it's just generally feedback on modules, the proposal or otherwise. So the agenda for today, we're going to update on progress on where we're at with the modules proposal and an experimental implementation, as we talked about. We have an exciting demo planned in the form of a QMod tidy demo, which is a key part of that experimental implementation, and an auth update as well, from an authentication and authorization perspective, as far as the central registry is concerned. But as Roger is going to demonstrate as well, we also can talk about auth in the context of the non-central registry case, which, as we talked about on the previous modules update call, is already something that's supported. So if you want to be using an existing OCI server or what we originally called the public-private split, although we still need to come up with a better name for that and actually talk about it using its new name. If you want to split your access to modules between two different OCI servers or multiple OCI servers, that's still supported and would even work with QMod tidy. But let's get into it. So a quick update on progress. Lots of CLs landing in the main Q repository. As we promised, all of these are marked as experimental, and we'll talk about the detail of QMod tidy in a minute. We don't make this explicit in each of the CLs, but there's still an environment variable that needs to be set if you want to do anything as far as modules is concerned. So for anyone who's overly curious, ahead of this sort of all being logically ready, then please feel free to just have a look at the code as it's landing, because it's all in the public repo, of course. One thing we did talk about, we have been talking about up until this point, is that we would publish to the central registry via a GitHub app, sort of like an auto-publish. When you tag something, it will auto-publish it to the central registry. We've actually decided to leave that for a later phase. The main reason being that it leaves a sort of slightly odd experience of if you are using the central registry and, say, for example, a company OCI registry, splitting between the two, because the documentation for the company registry would be something like use QMod upload to publish your module. But then for the central registry would say, oh, just tag it and it will be automatically published. And that's sort of a bit odd from an experience perspective, because really the GitHub app is like a tool that you might choose to use if you want to use tagging and auto-publishing. So instead, what we've done is we said, well, actually, let's just do the baseline thing day one and have QMod upload. We might just bike shed on the naming of that command, being the base thing for publishing a module. And again, it might be QMod publish, but it doesn't really matter. So then we have a consistent set of documentation that we'll have for this day one of the experimental implementation, where we'll say, whether you're speaking to the central registry or your company registry, QMod upload is the way of actually publishing. Then what we'll do is, in a later phase, if the experiment is working out nicely, as in we're validating our hypotheses on how modules should work, etc., then we'll actually introduce the GitHub app as a means of streamlining people's workflows, of saying, well, if you want to auto-publish modules based on a tag, then here's the GitHub app to actually do that. So then we can support sort of more naturally that the base case of people wanting to have a command that they run to publish a module, as well as the sort of the more Go-like flow of people wanting to auto-publish if they tag a repository. Richard, please.
Yeah, I think having some kind of method that you guys create would make sense. I think for the GitHub app, I would be a little bit concerned about it uploading my own code that's belongs to the company. So maybe it would be nice to create a GitHub action that we can add to our workflows, and then like we can put that anywhere we want.
Totally, yep. And that's actually a very good point. That's another part of the reason for doing QMod upload first, is that then we can do the GitHub action so that you can use QMod upload. And so then if you want to use the GitHub app for the auto publish, then great. For example, Tony Worm has been clear that he likes the Go approach of, I want to tag it and release it, as in he's got his workflows oriented around that. And for certain open source projects, I can see that actually being quite popular. However, we don't want to, do you see what I mean? If not everyone's going to use that, it's kind of a weird experience to say, well, that's how you publish things day one, to say you must install this GitHub app, as opposed to just use QMod upload and it will work. And then to your point, we'll introduce a GitHub action. I think that's a fairly logical thing to do off the back of that, where it makes sure that Q is available, then runs QMod upload and off you go. Someone else had a hand, Roger.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so I just mentioned one other thing that I think is an important reason to do the other thing first as well, is that that tagging something and then letting the app do something is fundamentally asynchronous. So you actually have no idea whether it's failed until you actually go and, well, you have to wait for a bit, and then at the moment it appears or it doesn't appear. And like this happened to me half an hour ago. It's like, why is it not appearing? So I went into the logs for the service. It's like, oh yeah, I've named the tag of the wrong conventions. But you don't get synchronous feedback. If you had with the upload command, you'll get feedback immediately. So you'll get GitHub action fails or whatever. And I think that's a way better user experience. And if we wanted to do that for the auto tagging for the GitHub app thing, we'd have to, we probably will, but make some extra infrastructure to wait and tell you about that tag, that the result of that asynchronous thing. So
it just feels more heavyweight to implement such mechanics and stuff for day one of the experimental implementation. And so hence why we've decided, okay, GitHub app for the auto publishing will follow later. QMod upload will then be the consistent way of doing that day one. It makes things a whole load simpler documentation wise. Richard, exactly to your point, people are more in control. Except Rog, to your point, we can deal with the how do we provide feedback later on as well. So we've also continued to work on the central registry implementation as well, which will support GitHub-based modules for phase one, and we will talk about that a bit later on. But Rog, is now a good time? Can we have a little drum roll for a QMod tidy demo? If you want to share your screen.
I will share my screen. I should have made the font size bigger, really, but we'll have to hope that this is good for people. Right.
So just whilst Roger's sharing his screen, there's a refresher on what we covered on the last modules update call. We showed how we can set Q registry to split between two different OCI servers for your fetching of modules. What we also sort of implicitly showed as part of that as well is the fact that existing auth that people might have set up for custom OCI servers is also supported as well. So Rog, over to you. QMod tidy is sort of orthogonal to all of that because all of that already exists within the Q loader. Rog, what's our setup here? Are we using a single OCI server, or are we split between two?
So currently we've got, so I've got two environment variables set, Q experiment modules, which you have to set in order to enable modules, the network modules tool, and this is our current temporary registry, which works, but will all probably disappear in the future. So please don't rely on it. So the scenario that I'm going to talk about. So first, like QMod tidy is an interesting thing because actually in Go, you have quite a lot of complexity around modules. You have like arbitrary queries. You can ask, you can go get something with greater than version, less than version. You've got quite a lot of different commands. But actually, if you're anything like me, the command that you use most is just go mod tidy to get new dependencies, to clean up old ones, to ensure that you're in a good state. So I think, and from a usability point of view, without that, we haven't got a very nice usable implementation. If you've got without the other things, I think it's probably none of them are totally essential. So in this scenario, I took our the stuff that we're using for CI inside the Q repository, and that's actually got a few things that are actually shared across a bunch of our repositories. So one of the modules is this schema store, which I think has come from, probably imported from JSON schema originally.
Yeah, schemastore.org, which is a collection of JSON schemas.
So I just took this this verbatim from what we've got, and we've got a package called JSON, which has like the schema for JSON workflow, and so if we look at what we've got going on, store. So this is what this is what we've got for our module.q. Actually, maybe we could just edit that so it looks like something you'd see normally. And if we run qmod tidy on that, you notice that it's rewritten it. Now I do intend to make it so there's a bunch of rough edges here. These braces, extra braces are one, and this empty depth thing is another, but you can see it's rewritten it. And then we are using the GitHub app to publish, because that's the only way. So let's okay, let's publish another tag vqv005.
So just to be clear, this will be replaced by qmod upload in this situation. Rog is currently just using the tag because we're implementing the auth side of things in order for qmod upload to work to the central registry. Right now, instead, we're piggybacking on the fact that Rog has already installed the GitHub app. He tags, he pushes, and so that the auth side of it is already taken care of in that situation.
So that should now be in the store. Of course, we don't get feedback, so we don't know for sure, but we can try. So here's a module that relies on that. So we can see that it's got this base, and there are various places where we I can't remember where we import that remote thing there. So we can if we have a look at okay, let's assume we didn't have any dependencies.
So now, just to refresh, Rog, is that if you just close a few windows here, because I'm getting a bit of motion sickness with the number of windows, we're now effectively in a let's call it a user or a client module that is depending on the module that you just published.
That's right.
Right, and here we're looking at the q.mod module.q that is empty. So but that basically means there are no dependencies that this client or user module is aware of yet, but one of the files you just looked at has an import that is basically unsatisfied at this point, and so you're going to use qmod tidy to resolve that.
Yeah, so if we do qvet, so if we do qvet now, let's say can't get this direct, we don't know, no dependency found for this import card. Okay, so if we run qmod tidy now, oops, I need to do it to another slight walk. You need to do it from the root directory.
But that's a rough edge that we can.
Yeah, there are a bunch of rough edges. This is early stuff, and we can see that it's actually gone to the store, found the dependency, worked out what the latest one is, and put that in. So if we vet now, then it's fine.
Yep.
So if we maybe want to publish that.
So when you say that, we're now in the module that depended on the first module that you.
That's right. Yep.
Right.
And maybe we can publish that as tag qp002, and we're going to publish that. We're going to.
That tag already exists. Just FYI. Did you intend to do
it? Actually exists. So this is my failure earlier. I was tagging these things. One's got a Q prefix and the other has not.
Ah, thank you.
So that's
keen eye.
So okay, we published that, and now we should be able to go into the sort of the main bit where we've got this main thing which imports actually imports, in this case, let's say it's importing both of them. And we can say, we can have a look at that.
You could do your QVet check again to show that it fails.
Certainly, that's okay. We've got no dependencies there. QVet.
So let's maybe just kill a few of these windows.
Yes. Okay, so that's our code. And now if we run qmod tidy, then that's worked. And it's pulled in. Now, one thing you can see here, this is very new functionality that I've just implemented this today for the mod tidy, is that here we didn't specify a major version for our input paths. So in general, unlike with Go, you only have to specify a major version for V2 and above. In Q, technically you always have to specify it. But if you don't specify it, the defaults are taken from the module.q file. So here we can see that for this V0, for major version V0 of this module, this is the default, which means that we can import, and if there's only one such module in the dependency graph, then it will Qmod will automatically mark it as the default dependency. So if we take that default out and do qvet, oh, actually, it shouldn't work, but it does. I don't know why. Yes, it should sort of complain that there's no default. But that's I think that means that it should be much easier to change major versions in and we have the thought that actually changing major versions is going to be more common in the configuration.
But not only that, I think Richard just made a very good point, is that it sort of is an easier adoption curve as well. Is that if you've got existing code that doesn't mention anything about the major version in the path, then you can still relatively quickly pick up Q modules and get going with them day one. So that's another benefit as well, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I'll just demonstrate. So we've got some unused dependencies in the module file. Then theoretically, it should.
Big moment of truth here.
Remove them. So there we are. We didn't actually import. We didn't actually have anything that used the dependency that I just wrote there, and it removed it.
So there's quite a lot of sort of magic happening behind the scenes here with Qmod tidy that's, I think, just worth chatting through. Is that you didn't have to run something like qmod get or anything like that at all in this situation. So that's something that incidentally is worth pointing out. We will add in a later phase as a command, because that's a more precision tool, for want of a better phrase. And we think, as you said earlier on, Rog, that qmod tidy is actually going to be sufficient for day one and give us more bang for buck than people running individual qmod get commands, for example.
Yeah, I mean, you can get the equivalent of qmod of get, but just by adding an import path, right? That's a get at latest. Or if you know the version, well, then you can always still add. You can always still edit your module file.
And then run qmod tidy to
run qmod tidy
it up.
Yeah, exactly.
So
you're still not a million miles away. It's still not too hard.
Yeah.
Even if you haven't got an explicit get command.
But again, I think just to emphasize, day one, we wanted to provide something that was useful, usable, etc. And the qmod tidy sort of seemed to give good bang for buck there. David, I don't know whether you had a question. I saw a question come in.
Sorry, no, it was an applause.
Okay, all right. I couldn't see whether it was a wave or a hand or anything. So that's, but Rog, again, just to talk about the point that I made earlier on, is that nothing here has done or said anything as far as auth is concerned. And so effectively auth is like which OCI server we're speaking to is also not sort of spoken about here at all. And those things are all orthogonal to QMod tidy itself. As in, if it happened to be coming from another server, then great. But in this situation, it just happens to be coming from one OCI server.
Yeah, I actually, in an earlier version of this demo, I actually had a version of Q registry that looked like this, where you had one, the public server, but also you said for all modules inside with this prefix, we're going to talk to this local registry. So that might be, and that's like something you always know by looking at the import path which registry it's going to talk to. So in this, and that just worked, and the two can have different authorization, ways of authenticating to each one of them.
Yep, and that's something we covered on the Richard, please.
I had a question about the use of modules across packages. Is there anything, any implementation which gets packages, the modules across those kind of things?
I'm not quite sure I followed the question, as in when you say across packages.
Would this handle the dependencies for all the packages, including the ones that you've written, as well as the packages that you've imported? Yeah,
I'd say so. So these are these dependencies. If this dependency is in this module, then it'll import directly from this module. If this import is from somewhere else, it'll come from the registry. And all the packages that the import the version resolution logic, make sure that you're only importing one version of any module, major version of any module at any time.
Okay.
Does that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So for example, if that JSON package that you imported has additional dependencies, it would go fetch those too.
Absolutely, yes. So in this case, we are actually, I can demonstrate that, because this module actually depends on the JSON package. So if we can see that if we remove that, so now we're not explicitly importing that JSON package, but this uses it. And if we do QMod tidy, then we can see that it's pulled in that module too.
Yeah, I guess this would be made slightly clearer if we had a diagram showing the transitive dependencies and how that all kind of then works when you run QMod tidy. But TLDR, Richard, yeah, it absolutely works, and that's really the benefit and beauty of QMod tidy, is it just does all this work for you. And Roger, I guess one thing worth pointing out is that we're probably going to implement some sort of caching as well day one.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just to avoid superfluous network requests. So again, it is experimental. It is a day one thing, but the reason for the caching thing is that we also in the central registry want to trial requiring that when someone publishes a module to the central registry, that it is tidy, at least. So that way you sort of avoid the slight footgun of someone having to remember to run QMod tidy locally. You can enforce it effectively on the server side so that you only publish tidy modules, and also that you don't publish modules that contain bad files as well. So again, we're shifting that from, because that was something that was effectively going to be taken care of by the GitHub auto-publishing. Now in this situation, we sort of make it a first-class thing for the central registry day one as part of the experimentation as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you're running you're running Q eval in several times, you really don't want it to download everything every time you do that, which is what it is doing at the moment. So yeah, it's not ideal currently, but that will change. I think there's a question from or a hand from David.
I think there was some
so
timing.
my question was around the GitHub app and whether or not your tags would work in a monorepo environment. Because that's how I work. And so Daniel already answered that you're assuming that the Q module lives at the top of the repo at the moment. And so that's okay, just wanted to know. But I'm assuming then that for monorepos, the QMod publish would still be our way to go.
Exactly so. And that's another reason as well, is that the even though we have this top level restriction right now, that the tagging mechanism for the auto publishing thing is something we want to push out. But still, that relaxing that Daniel said of the module needing to be at the top level of the repo would still, unless Roger wants to correct me, still be relevant, as in, even though QMod upload would be the sort of the better way of doing it, I still think we have that restriction of the module being at the root of the repo.
I think actually, like for QMod upload doesn't necessarily even know anything about
Of course.
Git, right? So if you run it in your Git in your module, and it doesn't necessarily know whether it might optionally look at the tags so that it can associate some metadata with the upload, but in general we wouldn't have that restriction.
Daniel?
This will matter when we talk about auth-z in a little bit, but we should get to the rest of the slides.
Very good point. David, that's a great question. One where we will just get a bit more of a consistent and coherent answer for next time, so that we're all on the same page, because the pushing of the auto publishing to a later phase fixes some things, but as Daniel will talk about with auth-z, your question caught us slightly off guard there, but it's a good question, one that we should have had an answer to, so thank you for forcing on that one.
I mean, in a sense, that Go convention for tagging is there only because publishing, the only way of publishing Go module is with the tags. But if we're actually going to move away from that, then actually we don't even need that convention, really. You can use that as a convention for yourself if you like, and use that as the basis for publishing for your QMod upload.
Completely.
Yeah.
David, that's as far as the tagging convention is concerned, that sort of falls into the bucket of now we can push that to a later phase to finesse any detail that's required there. But as Roger said, that it might not even be a requirement that there is a convention. And as far as the mono repo is concerned, let's just drift into the auth-z piece, but finish up with sort of firm up a final answer on anything if we need to in the next session, if that's okay.
Yeah, that works great. Awesome progress. Thank you so much.
Rog, anything else you want to show off?
I think I showed off enough already. Thank you. I shall stop presenting and
good. Excited that we have QMod Tidy. Let me share my screen again. QMod Tidy demo, waiting screen share. QMod Tidy demo done. GitHub based auth. Daniel, can I hand over to you for this?
Yeah, so basically for the central, for what we call the central registry, meaning that we will be able to support you uploading or downloading modules as OCI artifacts to your own OCI registry, such as, for example, Google Cloud or a Docker registry. But we also want to have a quote-unquote central place where people can share public Q modules with each other, right? For example, I think this is what Richard was trying to ask earlier. If Richard publishes a module and I want to use it, we should be using the same registry, because otherwise we're not going to find each other's modules. So for this central registry, we need two pieces to be in place. One is authentication. So if I want to, for example, publish a module, who am I? And the other one is authorization. So I've proven that I am this person, but am I allowed to publish or upload a new version of some module? So for authentication, it's pretty standard. If you've ever used anything that integrates with, for example, GitHub with auth, we will not do a username and password system on our server. That is sort of the classic way. We will do what you might call the Tailscale model, because they've gone this way as well, which is that they only allow login through third-party identity providers. But in this case, day one, we'll only use GitHub, just because we want to get something out there that works without delaying by adding more providers. And most developers already have GitHub, so that's an easy thing to do. And the auth-z, we could, for example, do what Docker does with Docker Hub, where you create an org and then you add people to the org, and then those people can create images and they can create repos. But instead of implementing that whole system, we want to piggyback off of GitHub's ACL, or rather authorization system, if you will. There's two reasons for that. One, that is easier, that is faster to get implemented because we're effectively mirroring what is already on GitHub. But on the other hand, it's also much easier for most users. So for example, if we are Qlang and we already have the Qlang org on GitHub, we can effectively say, Roger has admin or write access to that org on GitHub, and hence he's able to publish any modules under github.com/Qlang on our registry, right? So that is the idea for OauthZ. Did that make much of a sense?
Yeah, so would it be repository based too? Because let's say in my no, never mind, because in my organization, let me finish that idea. In my organization, I only have write permissions into certain repos, but we wouldn't be published into the public registry. We would be published into a private registry anyway. So we would be not doing that. My personal repositories would go, or open source repositories, they would go to a public registry. So in that regard, it wouldn't be a problem. It would only be the company repos where I own a repository where I have write permissions and I have push permissions into the protected branches and whatnot, but I'm not the admin because it's an enterprise.
So that's a very good point, Dave. There's 2 points to pick up there, I think, is firstly around private repositories. The day one for the experimental implementation, we will support private modules, as in private repositories as well. So even if you're in your personal account, or maybe you've got a personal organization that you control in some way, shape, or form, if you will be able to publish private modules to the central registry and have them be private in the central registry as well. So, but you still can, if as a company, for example, you didn't want to do that, you said, well, no, we already have an OCI server, so we will publish to our company Q modules to our company OCI server. That's all totally possible as well. But in that situation where people don't have their own OCI server, for example, in a company that just a small team, for example, and everything is GitHub based, then they still will be able to publish private Q modules to the central registry and use the GitHub-based AuthZ in this situation to control not only the publishing, but the fetching as well, i.e. the getting. So for such private modules, they will just be like invisible for someone who does not have access to that repo on GitHub at all. So in that situation, we have a cat that has joined the call. We will. So I think we need a diagram really here for next time to help visualize this, to make clear that if you've got your own company OCI server and you want to use that, perfect, no problem at all. If you don't have that, but you still want to do private modules, phase one, you will also be able to do that by the central registry, and they will be private just like the repository is private as well on GitHub as well. Does that help to clarify things, or have I just confused things without a diagram, David?
No, that sounds very good. That sounds like a premium offering, in my opinion, that you guys could monetize as well.
Well, the thing is, let's just not forget we're in an experimental phase here. And the experimental part of this is really predominantly helping us to test the hypothesis that the Q open source projects modules proposal is sound, that it makes sense, that doing things as OCI artifacts makes sense, that implementing things like qmod tidy makes sense, etc. That the qmod upload is the right name for the command to publish something. It's almost certainly not the right name for it, but do you see what I mean? That's the hypothesis we're testing here with this experimental implementation. And the central registry is there to help sort of support the testing of that hypothesis. So the central registry could may very well fall over as part of our experiment here. But that'll be fine. We'll stand it back up again, and we can keep testing using the central registry. For those people who have their own OCI registries, great. Please just use them in exclusively if you have one within your organization, or this whole split thing of using the central registry and your company one. So honestly, the goal is to try and kick the tires on the Q modules proposal as much as possible here. Test the hypothesis that it makes sense from the perspective of the open source project. That's the main goal as part of this experimental phase here.
Thanks so much for the explanation.
Great. Welcome, Jonathan and Kat. I think we are, so great. If there's no other points there, then we can move on to that. We have a mea culpa. Well, I have a mea culpa here, in that we haven't yet actually completed our tweaking of the modules proposal. We have instead been focused on all of the progress that we've talked about over the last few minutes here. We are still planning to publish the V3, even though they are relatively minor tweaks versus V2. We want to ensure that we have consistent, when we come to sort of announce, if you like, the experimental implementation, we want to ensure we have consistent proposal docs that match up with what it is that people are kicking the tires on. So we will do that. It might well be that, given that we're pushing super hard on this experimental implementation right now, that we don't get the V3 until we make the announcement on the actual experimental implementation itself. So we deliver one at the same time. We had hoped to do it before then, but it might just be that those happen at the same time a bit later on. But perhaps folks will understand we're focusing on the experimental implementation right now and using that as the forcing function to get something out and into people's hands as quickly as possible. So the next steps really being that, well, hopefully we can see the right slide there. Yep, we want to continue landing changes, excuse me, into the Qline Q repo. Reminded, this is all going to be experimental. Complete that initial central registry with the auth N and auth Z that Daniel talked about, and really continue to flesh out our scenario tests or end-to-end tests, whatever name I should be giving these things, because that's really going to be the proof point for what those tests are going to be the proof points for the use cases that we actually support day one as well. So theoretically, on day one, someone would be able to read through those end-to-end tests and go, yep, this covers my use case, fantastic. We will actually provide nicer documentation on that. But the end-to-end tests are effectively keeping us honest to make sure that we cover the use cases that we're hoping to, and we say we will for this experimental implementation. So on that note, I think we're done as far as what we wanted to talk about today. Please, Richard.
Yeah, so I'm very excited and really impressed with all the changes that you guys have made since the proxy days. So I'm very happy that you guys took all the feedback, and this looks amazing. And my question is, when I'm happy to start kicking the tires whenever you guys are ready. I think mostly for my use case, it would be from a private OCI registry point of view. So cool. Whenever you guys are ready for that, I'm happy to start testing that out.
Thank you, firstly, for the feedback on that. Again, if there's anything that people are seeing that is sort of a concern to them or anything, please just let us know. That's precisely the reason for these sessions. And thank you for the offer of being like an early tester. That's great. I think we'll use the modules channel on Slack and these calls really to keep in touch with folks so that we can get people picking it up early, if you like. Because if you are happy to kick the tires on something that is not yet announced with no documentation, that's great. It will obviously come with the caveats that there is no documentation, etc. And we'll be working on that, but it would be super useful. And I think we then need to start getting into a pattern of, and we've sort of started this already, raising issues on GitHub that are tagged in a certain way so that we can capture problems, whether that be us finding problems, or people like you, Richard, being early testers, capturing problems as well. That'll be useful, because that will also then help us to, as a forcing function, to say, well, how are we tagging when we're going to fix these things as well? Because you might run into something where we'll say, actually, you know what, we're not going to do that phase 1, but we'll do it phase 2 or phase N on the module side of things. So that'll be good as well. So thanks very much for the offer. Jonathan, does the cat have any questions about modules?
The cat is completely behind your vision for modules.
Right. I was going to suggest we have a mascot or a mascat. Oh no, sorry. Oh dear. For modules, and maybe it is the cat. Sorry. Perhaps we'd better end the call quickly before I attempt any very bad puns.
Too late.
Yeah, sorry. Great. If we don't have any more questions now, please feel free to ping in the modules channel or in the follow-up to the GitHub discussion. Thank you, Rog, for the demo. Thanks to everyone who's joined live, and thanks to anyone who's catching up in the follow-up on recording, and we'll publish that as soon as possible.